The Silver Lantern Casino hummed with its usual 4 a.m. energy, that dead zone hour when the weekend warriors had stumbled home and only the hardcore gamblers remained. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across green felt tables, while slot machines blinked their hypnotic patterns into the nicotine-stained darkness. At table 7, Mason Torres dealt blackjack with the mechanical precision of a man who'd done this exact motion 50,000 times before. 36 years old, average height, brown hair going gray at the temples, unremarkable in every possible way. The kind of dealer customers forgot the moment they left his table. "Hit me," said the businessman in the expensive suit, his tie loosened and his confidence wavering with his dwindling chip stack. Mason's hands moved like clockwork. Card from the shoe, slide across, felt. The 7 of diamonds. The businessman busted at 23. "House wins," Mason said quietly, sweeping the chips away with practiced efficiency. This was exactly how Mason Torres had planned it. What the businessman didn't know, what the pit boss monitoring from the elevated platform didn't know, what the dozen security cameras recording every angle didn't know, was that Mason Torres had just executed one move in the most sophisticated casino heist in Las Vegas history. And in 3 hours and 17 minutes, he would vanish forever, taking $22 million with him. 6 months earlier, "Torres is solid," said Danny Reeves, Silver Lantern's head of table games, reviewing Mason's employee file with the casual attention of a man who'd hired hundreds of dealers over the years. 7 years, no write-ups, never calls in sick. Customers like him because he doesn't talk too much. Across from Danny's desk, casino manager Patricia Walsh nodded absently while checking her phone. "Background clean? Spotless. No gambling violations, no financial red flags. He's exactly the kind of employee we want. Invisible and reliable." If only they'd looked deeper. Mason Torres did have a secret, but it wasn't in any employee file or background check. It lived in the encrypted browsers on his home computer, in the cryptocurrency wallets hidden behind layers of digital anonymity, in the private poker rooms where he'd been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. Online poker addiction. Not the kind that shows up in credit reports or gets you banned from casinos. The sophisticated kind that uses offshore accounts and digital currencies. The kind that had cost Mason his marriage, his savings, and very nearly his sanity. "I need to talk to you," his ex-wife Sarah had said during their last conversation, 6 months before his shift at table 7. They were sitting in a Starbucks near her new apartment, the divorce papers between them like a minefield. "About what?" "About the money, Mason." "About where it all went." Sarah's voice was tired, defeated. "I found the transactions, the crypto exchanges, the poker sites." Mason had stared at his coffee cup, unable to meet her eyes. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You gambled away our house, our savings, our future." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "How much do you owe?" The number was burned into Mason's brain like a brand. $347,000. To 3 different offshore gambling syndicates who weren't known for their patience with delinquent accounts. "I can fix this," he'd said. "How, Mason?" "How are you going to fix this? You make $48,000 a year dealing cards. Even if you never gambled again, it would take you a decade to pay off your debts." She was right, of course. The math was impossible through legitimate means. But Mason Torres was nothing if not a careful planner. And he'd been planning something very, very illegitimate for months. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Mason was dealing to his usual Tuesday night regulars when he noticed something interesting about the man in seat 3. Vincent Chen looked like any other mid-level professional burning through his discretionary income at the blackjack tables. Polo shirt, khakis, the kind of watch that said successful but not flashy. He played basic strategy perfectly, never deviated from the book, and tipped exactly 15%. But Mason noticed something else. Vincent was counting cards. Not obviously, the man was too smooth for that. But Mason had been dealing blackjack for 7 years, and he could spot the tells. The way Vincent's betting patterns shifted with the count, the micro-expressions when the deck went hot or cold, the casual way he'd excuse himself to the bathroom when the shoe turned negative. After Vincent's 4th visit, Mason made his move. "Excuse me," Mason said during his break, approaching Vincent at the bar. I think you dropped this. He handed Vincent a napkin with a phone number written on it. Vincent looked at the napkin, then at Mason, his expression carefully neutral. I don't think this is mine. Check your pocket. Vincent reached into his jacket and found another napkin, this one with a single word written on it. Partner? They met 2 days later at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Henderson, far from the strip and its omnipresent surveillance. You're very observant, Vincent said, sliding into the booth across from Mason, and very foolish. Do you know what happens to dealers who proposition card counters? The same thing that happens to card counters who get caught counting, Mason replied. But I'm not here to turn you in. I'm here to make you an offer. Vincent sipped his coffee, studying Mason with the calculating gaze of a man who'd spent years reading people's intentions. I'm listening. You're good at what you do, maybe the best I've seen, but you're limited by the game's natural variance and the casino's countermeasures. What if I told you there was a way to remove both those limitations? I'd say you're either lying or stupid. Mason leaned forward. What if the dealer knew exactly what cards were coming next? For the first time, Vincent's carefully controlled expression showed genuine interest. Hypothetically speaking, that would be advantageous. More than advantageous. It would be foolproof. No more counting, no more heat from pit bosses, no more getting backed off when you win too much. And what would you want in return for this hypothetical information? Mason met his eyes. 50% of everything. Vincent laughed, a sound without humor. You want half my winnings to cheat at a game I'm already winning legitimately? I want half the winnings from a game where we control every variable, where instead of grinding out $20,000 a month with constant risk, we take home $200,000 a month with zero chance of detection. Zero chance, if we do it right. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, running calculations that went far beyond basic blackjack strategy. Finally, he spoke. Hypothetically, how would this work? Mason smiled. I know someone who can help with the technical side. Alex Petrov had been banned from 15 casinos across 3 states, not for cheating, but for something worse, making casinos look stupid. At 28, Alex was an electronic engineering dropout who discovered that his talent for miniaturized electronics was far more profitable when applied to gambling than to legitimate engineering work. His specialty was devices so small and sophisticated that casino security had never seen anything like them. This is impossible, Alex said, examining Mason's proposal in the cluttered workshop behind his Henderson apartment. Circuit boards and microscopic components covered every surface. The air smelled of solder and energy drinks. Impossible how? Vincent asked. Not technically impossible, practically impossible. You're talking about a device that can read cards through the shuffler, transmit data wirelessly without being detected by RF sweeps, and operate for hours without any external power source. Alex picked up a grain of rice-sized component. The power requirements alone would require a battery the size of a quarter. Mason had done his research. What about RFID technology, like the chips they use in the cards themselves? The casino cards don't have RFID chips, but they could. Alex paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. You want to modify the cards themselves? Not modify, replace. With cards that look identical but contain microscopic RFID tags that can be read by a device hidden in the shuffling shoe. Jesus Christ, Alex sat back in his chair. That's actually brilliant. Completely insane, but brilliant. Vincent leaned forward. Could it work? Theoretically? Yes, the RFID tags could be paper-thin, embedded in the cardstock itself. A reader in the shuffling shoe could scan each card as it shuffled, creating a real-time map of the deck order, and transmit that information via micro-vibrations to a smartphone app. The dealer would know the exact order of every card before it's dealt. Mason felt his heart rate increase. How long would it take to build? The hardware? Maybe 6 weeks if I work around the clock. But that's the easy part. Alex's expression grew serious. The hard part is getting it into the casino without detection. Security sweeps, X-ray machines, metal detectors. Plus, you'd need to replace an entire deck of cards without anyone noticing. Leave that to me, Mason said quietly. Alex and Vincent exchanged glances. What's your background? Vincent asked. You seem to know a lot about casino security for a blackjack dealer. Mason's smile was grim. I've been planning this for a very long time. 2 months later, the Silver Lantern's card room operated like a military precision instrument. Fresh decks arrived every morning from the Nevada Gaming Commission-approved supplier. Each deck was inspected, verified, and distributed to the appropriate tables. Used decks were collected, destroyed, and documented with enough paperwork to satisfy both state gaming regulators and the casino's insurance company. Mason Torres had been studying this system for 3 years. "Morning, Mason," said Jennifer Walsh, the cardroom supervisor, as he picked up his fresh decks for the day shift. "How's the new apartment working out?" "Great, thanks." Mason accepted the plastic-wrapped decks with the same casual indifference he'd shown every day for 7 years. Much closer to work. What Jennifer didn't know was that Mason's new apartment was actually a sophisticated workshop where he'd been practicing card manipulation techniques with the obsessive focus of a concert pianist. 8 hours a day, every day, learning to handle cards so smoothly that even high-definition security cameras couldn't detect his manipulations. The plan was breathtakingly simple in concept, impossibly complex in execution. Phase 1. Alex would create RFID embedded playing cards that were visually and tactily identical to the casino's standard B-brand cards. The RFID tags would be so thin they wouldn't affect the card's weight or flexibility. Phase 2. Mason would gradually replace the legitimate cards with the modified versions during his shifts, one card at a time over several weeks. The old cards would disappear into his dealer's apron and eventually be destroyed at home. Phase 3. Alex's scanning device, disguised as a routine shuffling shoe component, would read the RFID tags and transmit the deck order to Vincent's smartphone via micro-vibrations, undetectable to both human senses and the casino's electronic surveillance. Phase 4. Vincent would relay the information to Mason through subtle hand signals, allowing Mason to deal winning hands to predetermined accomplices while making it appear completely random. The beauty of the system was its restraint. No massive jackpots, no obvious patterns, just a statistical advantage that would appear to be natural variance to anyone analyzing the results. "Torres, table 12, called Danny Reeves during the pre-shift briefing. "We've got a private party coming in tonight. High-limit players from Macau. I want our best dealers on those tables." Mason nodded with the appropriate mixture of professional pride and indifference. Inside, his pulse quickened. High-limit tables meant larger bets, which meant larger potential profits from their operation, but it also meant more scrutiny. "Any special instructions?" Mason asked. "Standard protocols, extra security, pit boss oversight, the usual. These guys are dropping serious money, so we want everything perfect." Perfect, Mason thought. That's exactly what this is going to be. 11:47 p.m., Silver Lantern Casino, table 12. The Macau players were exactly what Mason had expected. Wealthy, sophisticated, and completely focused on the cards. They played with the mechanical intensity of men for whom gambling wasn't entertainment, but business. Vincent Chen sat in seat 5, looking perfectly natural among the international high rollers. His betting pattern would appear random to observers, but Mason knew better. Vincent was waiting for the signal. Alex's device had been installed 3 days earlier during the routine maintenance window when the shuffling shoes were cleaned and calibrated. The modification was so subtle that even the technician who serviced the equipment hadn't noticed the addition of what appeared to be a standard diagnostic sensor. Mason loaded the modified deck into the shuffling shoe. 6 months of preparation had led to this moment. The shoe hummed quietly as it shuffled. To everyone else, it was the familiar sound of automated card mixing. To Mason, it was the sound of $22 million being arranged in perfect order. His phone, set to vibrate in a specific pattern, buzzed against his leg. Once for ace, twice for king, 3 times for queen. Alex's program was transmitting the exact sequence of the shuffled deck. Mason dealt the first hand. Vincent bet $5,000, a modest amount for this table, but significant enough to matter if he won consistently. Mason dealt Vincent a queen and a king, 20. Vincent's subtle nod indicated he'd received Mason's nearly invisible signal. A slight pause before dealing the second card. The Macau businessman in seat 1 drew to 18 and stood. Seat 3 busted with a 10 over his 12. Vincent's 20 won easily. Over the next 4 hours, Vincent won 63% of his hands, well within normal variance for skilled play, but profitable enough to net $47,000 for the evening. More importantly, it was completely undetectable. "Good night, Vincent," Mason said as the businessman cashed out his chips. "Hope you enjoyed your stay." "Excellent service," Vincent replied with a slight smile. "I'll definitely be back." As Vincent walked away from the table, Mason felt a rush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with customer service. They just executed the first phase of the perfect crime, and nobody had noticed a thing. But Mason Torres was about to learn that in Las Vegas, somebody always notices everything. Security office, Silver Lantern Casino. Frank Morrison had been watching gamblers cheat for 23 years, first as a Nevada gaming control agent and now as Silver Lantern's head of security. He'd seen every scam, every angle, every technique that desperate or greedy people used to beat the house. Card marking, chip switching, computer-assisted play, dealer collusion. Frank had caught them all. His office was decorated with photos of himself handcuffing cheaters, commendations from the Gaming Commission, and a plaque that read, "The House Always Knows." But Frank Morrison was about to encounter a cheating operation so sophisticated that even his trained eye would miss it entirely. "Run the analytics on table 12 from last night," Frank told his assistant, Maria Sanos, as they reviewed the overnight reports. "Those Macau players dropped some serious money, but I want to make sure everything was clean." "Already on it," Maria replied, pulling up the data on her computer. "Dealer was Torres. He's solid. Been here 7 years, never a problem. The players' win-loss ratios are all within normal parameters." Frank studied the numbers. Vincent Chen, the businessman in seat 5, had won $47,000. A good night, but not suspiciously good. The other players had lost varying amounts, with the total house edge remaining consistent with expected probability. Any unusual betting patterns? Chen varied his bets based on the cards, but it looks like basic strategy, with some intuitive adjustments. Nothing that screams card counting. Frank nodded. Card counters were a constant concern, but they were also relatively easy to spot if you knew what to look for. Sudden betting increases when the deck went hot, bathroom breaks during negative counts, the subtle tells that even the best counters couldn't completely hide. What about Torres? Any deviations from standard dealing procedure? Maria pulled up the video footage. On the screen, Mason Torres dealt cards with the same methodical precision he'd shown for 7 years. No unusual pauses, no irregular hand movements, no obvious signals to players. Textbook dealing. Guys like a machine. Frank fast-forwarded through several hours of footage. Torres dealt thousands of hands with identical technique. If there was collusion happening, it was invisible to even high-definition surveillance cameras. "Keep an eye on this Chen character if he comes back," Frank said finally. "But I don't see anything worth investigating." What Frank didn't know was that he was looking at the result of 6 months of obsessive practice. Mason Torres had trained himself to cheat so smoothly that even frame-by-frame video analysis wouldn't reveal his techniques. The subtle finger position that indicated an ace was coming. The barely perceptible pause that meant the next card would bust the house. The microscopic head tilt that told Vincent when to increase his bet. All of it was happening in plain sight, under the watchful eyes of a dozen cameras, and none of it was detectable by conventional surveillance methods. 3:17 a.m., Silver Lantern Casino. The casino floor at 3 a.m. was a different world. The weekend party crowd had stumbled home hours ago. The serious gamblers had either lost their money or won enough to call it a night. What remained were the hardcore addicts, the insomniacs, and the professionals who preferred to work when the casino's attention was divided among fewer tables. Mason Torres loved the graveyard shift. "Slower pace tonight," observed Janet Kim, the pit boss covering the late shift. She was in her 50s, experienced, but also tired after pulling a double shift to cover for a sick colleague. "Always is on Tuesdays," Mason replied, dealing to his table of 3 players. Vincent was in his usual seat 5, flanked by 2 new faces, Maria Santos and David Park, both of whom had been carefully recruited over the past month. Maria was a cocktail waitress from a competing casino who'd racked up significant credit card debt. David was an unemployed programmer with a gambling problem and sophisticated understanding of probability mathematics. Neither knew the full scope of the operation, but both were happy to win money by following Vincent's betting signals. The genius of Mason's system was its compartmentalization. Maria and David thought they were part of a simple card-counting team. Vincent knew about the RFID system, but not about the other participants. Alex remained completely isolated, building and maintaining the technology while never setting foot in the casino. Only Mason knew the full picture. "Hit me," said Maria, showing 14 against Mason's 6. Mason's phone buzzed once. Ace coming. He paused imperceptibly, giving Maria the signal to stand instead. "Actually, I'll stand," Maria corrected herself. Mason's next card was the Ace of Spades. 21. Maria's 14 won when Mason busted with 17. Over the course of the 4-hour shift, the three-person team won a combined $23,000. Not enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but profitable enough to make the operation worthwhile. More importantly, they'd identified the perfect window for their activities. Tuesday through Thursday nights, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., when staffing was minimal and attention was focused on the poker room's weekly tournament. "Good night, folks," Mason said as his shift ended. "Hope you enjoyed the games." As the players cashed out their chips, Mason felt the familiar rush of successful deception. They were building towards something bigger, and every successful session increased his confidence that they could pull off the ultimate score. But confidence, Mason was about to learn, could be a very dangerous thing. 1 month later, "We need to scale up," Vincent said during their monthly meeting at the Henderson Diner. "The current operation is profitable, but it's not going to generate the kind of money you need to clear your debts." Mason had been thinking the same thing. 300,000 in gambling debts required more than the steady 20,000 per month they were currently averaging. "What are you suggesting?" "Multiple casinos, different dealers, expand the network." Alex looked up from his laptop, where he'd been monitoring news feeds for any reports of unusual casino activity. "That means building more devices, recruiting more people, increasing our exposure risk exponentially. It also means increasing our profits exponentially," Vincent pointed out. Mason considered the proposal. The logical part of his brain understood the risks. More people meant more potential security leaks. More devices meant more chances for technical failure. More casinos meant more surveillance systems to evade. But the desperate part of his brain, the part that woke up every morning thinking about $347,000 in debt to people who expressed their impatience through violence, was seduced by the possibility of a bigger score. How would we do it? Vincent had clearly been thinking about this. "We recruit dealers from other casinos. Not full partners. They wouldn't know about the RFID system. We just pay them to deal specific cards to specific players at specific times." "That's not possible. You can't control which cards. You can if you prearrange the deck." The table went silent. "Explain," Mason said quietly. Vincent leaned forward. "Instead of relying on the shuffling shoe to randomize the cards, we prearrange certain sequences that favor our players. The recruited dealers just have to ensure those sequences reach the right people." Alex shook his head. "That's infinitely more complicated than what we're doing now. You're talking about deck manipulation, dealer coordination, timing synchronization across multiple casinos simultaneously. I'm talking about one big night," Vincent said. "Instead of grinding out small profits over months, we hit multiple casinos simultaneously for maximum impact, then disappear before anyone realizes what happened." Mason felt his pulse quicken. One big night. Enough money to pay off his debts and disappear forever. "How much are we talking about?" Vincent's smile was predatory. 20 million, maybe more. Silver Lantern Casino, 11:43 p.m. The Russian whale arrived exactly on schedule. Dmitry Volkov was everything Mason had expected from Vincent's description. 6 feet 4 inches of expensive suit and quiet menace, flanked by 2 bodyguards who looked like they bench-pressed automobiles for recreation. He carried himself with the casual confidence of a man who owned oil wells in small countries. "Good evening, Mr. Volkov," said Patricia Walsh, Silver Lantern's casino manager, personally greeting the high roller with the deference reserved for customers whose credit lines exceeded the GDP of small nations. "Your usual table is ready." Volkov nodded silently and followed Patricia to table 12, where Mason Torres waited with freshly shuffled cards and 17 years of casino experience that was about to be put to its ultimate test. This was the night they'd been planning for 4 months. Not just another modest win to build their bankroll, but the score that would set Mason free from his debts and fund his disappearance. Vincent sat in seat 3, looking perfectly natural among the international high rollers who'd gathered to watch Volkov play. David Park occupied seat 7, his laptop bag containing sophisticated electronics that appeared to be day trading software, but were actually monitoring Alex's RFID transmission system. But the most important person at the table was the man in seat 1, Thomas Chen, no relation to Vincent, a professional gambler from Hong Kong who'd been recruited specifically for this operation. Thomas didn't know about the RFID system, the prearranged deck sequences, or the broader conspiracy. He'd simply been told that certain betting patterns would be profitable on this particular night. Minimum bet is 5,000, Mason announced as he prepared to deal the first hand of what would either be his greatest triumph or his spectacular downfall. Volkov placed a stack of black chips in the betting circle. $50,000. The kind of bet that made pit bosses nervous and security directors reach for their phones. Mason dealt the cards with the same mechanical precision he'd perfected over 7 years, but his heart was pounding like a war drum. According to Alex's system, the next sequence of cards had been perfectly arranged. Volkov would receive hands that appeared strong, but would lose to the dealer's hidden blackjack. Thomas would receive hands that appeared weak, but would win through carefully timed dealer busts. The beauty of the system was its invisibility. To observers, it would look like natural variance, the random distribution of luck that made gambling possible. First hand, Volkov received King-Queen, a strong 20. Thomas received 6-4, a weak 10. Mason's up card was a 7. According to the plan, Mason's hole card should be an ace, giving him 18 and beating Volkov's 20. Thomas should draw the ace of spades, making 21. Mason checked his hole card, Jack of Hearts. His total was 17. Something was wrong. The RFID system had been feeding him perfect information for 4 months. Now, on the most important night of the operation, the cards weren't matching the predicted sequence. Mason maintained his professional demeanor while his mind raced through possibilities. Technical malfunction, interference from casino security equipment, sabotage by a team member who decided to betray the operation. Or worse, they'd been discovered. "I'll stand," said Volkov, his Russian accent thick with confidence. Thomas looked at his cards, then at Mason, obviously waiting for the subtle signal that would indicate whether to hit or stand. Mason gave him the signal for hit, a barely perceptible adjustment of his left hand. Thomas drew the ace of spades, 21. Mason drew for the house, Queen of Diamonds, 27. Bust. Both players won their hands, but Mason knew something was catastrophically wrong with their system. Over the next hour, the RFID predictions continued to be wildly inaccurate. Cards that should have been aces turned out to be face cards. Sequences that should have favored the house instead created massive player wins. And then Mason realized what was happening. The casino had changed their card supplier. The RFID tags that Alex had so carefully embedded in the B-brand cards were useless when the casino switched to bicycle cards for their high-limit tables. Mason was dealing with completely unmodified cards while his phone continued to receive signals from the cached RFID data of cards that were no longer in play. He was flying blind. But Thomas Chen, the professional gambler in seat 1, didn't know that. He continued to follow Mason's signals, betting larger amounts based on information that was now completely random. At 1:17 a.m., lightning struck. Thomas had been steadily increasing his bets based on Mason's increasingly desperate signals. When Mason indicated that the next hand would be a sure winner, Thomas pushed forward every chip he had, $4.8 million. The bet was so large that it stopped all conversation at nearby tables. Pit bosses materialized from nowhere. Security cameras zoomed in for close-ups. Mason dealt the cards with hands that he hoped weren't visibly shaking. Thomas, ace-king. Blackjack. The table erupted. Thomas had just won $7.2 million on a single hand, a payout that would make national news and trigger every possible level of casino investigation. But that's not what happened next. Volkov, who'd been losing steadily all night, suddenly stood up. "I'm done," he announced in his thick Russian accent. "This table is unlucky tonight." He collected his remaining chips, still several $1,000,000, and walked away from the table, followed by his bodyguards and the casino manager, who desperately tried to convince him to continue playing. The sudden departure of the evening's biggest player sent a ripple of confusion through the casino floor. Other high-limit players began to leave, sensing that the night's energy had shifted. Within minutes, Table 12 was nearly empty except for Thomas, who was staring in shock at his massive win, and Mason, who realized that everything was about to unravel. "Sir," said Janet Kim, the pit boss, approaching Thomas with the forced smile of someone delivering bad news. "We're going to need to verify this payout with our Gaming Commission representative. It's just routine for wins of this magnitude." Thomas nodded, still stunned by his good fortune. But Mason Torres knew better. The casino wasn't verifying the payout. They were buying time to figure out how a professional gambler had just beaten them for nearly $5 million on a single hand. And when they started investigating, they would discover things that Mason desperately needed to remain hidden. Silver Lantern Security Office, 2:34 a.m. Frank Morrison had seen a lot of strange things in his 23 years of casino security, but he'd never seen anything like the sequence of events that had just unfolded at Table 12. "Run it again," he told Maria Santos, who was reviewing the surveillance footage for the third time. On the screen, Mason Torres dealt cards with his usual mechanical precision. Thomas Chen made increasingly larger bets. Dmitry Volkov lost consistently despite playing perfect basic strategy. And then, at the moment of the largest payout in Silver Lantern history, Volkov simply walked away. "It doesn't make sense," Maria said. "Volkov is down maybe $2 million for the night. He's got unlimited credit. Why leave just as the table is getting interesting?" Frank studied the footage more carefully. Something about the sequence of events felt orchestrated, but he couldn't identify specific evidence of cheating. "What's Thomas Chen's background?" "Professional gambler from Hong Kong. He's been playing here intermittently for 6 months. Win-loss ratio is about break-even until tonight." "And Torres?" "Same story as always. 7 years, perfect record, no suspicious activity." Frank fast-forwarded through the footage, focusing on Mason's dealing technique. Every hand was dealt with identical precision. No visible signals to players. No deviation from standard procedures. But Frank's instincts, honed by decades of catching cheaters, were screaming that something was wrong. "Maria, pull Torres' schedule for the past 6 months. I want to see when he worked and which players were at his tables during those shifts." As Maria compiled the data, Frank continued studying the surveillance footage. He zoomed in on Mason's hands, looking for evidence of card manipulation. He analyzed the betting patterns of all players, searching for mathematical anomalies that might indicate collusion. What he found was disturbing in its subtlety. Over the past 4 months, a small group of players had consistently won modest amounts at Mason's tables. Not enough to trigger automated alerts, but enough to represent a statistically significant deviation from expected probability. Vincent Chen, Maria Santos, David Park, always playing during graveyard shifts, always winning just enough to stay under the radar. And tonight, Thomas Chen, no apparent relation to Vincent, but sharing a surname that might not be coincidental. "Frank," Maria said quietly, "you need to see this." On her computer screen was a compilation of data that told a story Frank had never seen before. The perfect inside job. Torres has been dealing to the same group of players for 4 months. They've won a combined $847,000 during that time. But here's the weird part. Their wins are distributed so precisely across different shifts and different betting amounts that it looks like natural variance unless you analyze it as a complete data set. Frank felt his stomach drop. "Show me tonight's activity." That's where it gets really strange. Up until Thomas Chen's big win, the night was actually unprofitable for players. Vincent Chen lost $12,000. David Park lost $8,000. Even Thomas was down until that final hand. So what changed? I don't know, but look at this. Maria pulled up a different screen showing unusual electronic activity in the casino systems. We had some weird interference with our RFID inventory tracking system around midnight. I think it was caused by someone's medical device or cell phone, but the timing is suspicious. Frank stared at the data, his mind racing through possibilities. RFID interference. Consistent but subtle player wins. A dealer with perfect credentials and no obvious cheating techniques. "Maria, I need you to do something for me. Check if we changed card suppliers recently." "Card suppliers?" "Just check." 5 minutes later, Maria had her answer. "We switched from B to bicycle cards for high-limit tables 3 weeks ago. Cost-saving measure." Frank felt the pieces clicking together. What if Torres and his team were using some kind of RFID system to read cards? That would explain the consistent wins and the sudden breakdown tonight when we switch card types. That's impossible. Our cards don't have RFID chips. They do if someone replaced them with modified cards. The implications hit them both simultaneously. If Frank's theory was correct, they weren't dealing with a traditional cheating ring. They were dealing with a sophisticated technology-based operation that had been siphoning money from the casino for months. "Get gaming commission security on the phone," Frank said, "and find Mason Torres. I want to talk to him right now." But when Maria tried to locate Mason, she discovered something that made Frank's theory feel uncomfortably plausible. Mason Torres had requested emergency vacation time 30 minutes ago and had already left the building. Mason Torres' apartment, 4:47 a.m. When investigators arrived, the place was stripped bare. No furniture, no belongings, just a burner phone in the sink with its SIM card destroyed. Detective Sarah Williams found a manila envelope taped inside a cabinet. Inside, a single page reading, "The house lost," and a phone number. They called. A recorded voice answered, "The operation is complete. Mason Torres no longer exists. The money will never be recovered. Have a nice day." The digital trail to nowhere. By 6 a.m., Torres had vanished. No credit cards, no phone pings, no travel records. His car was found abandoned above a tunnel leading to McCarran Airport. FBI agents Marcus Reed and Sarah Kim concluded he'd prepared identities, offshore accounts, and escape routes for years. The money? $22 million won at Blackjack by players following his RFID card reading signals. Fraud disguised as luck. $18 million had already been laundered through crypto exchanges into countries with strict banking secrecy. Unless he slips, Reed admitted, Torres may have pulled off the perfect crime. The casino's response. At the Silver Lantern board meeting, $22 million in losses loomed over the room. Insurance wouldn't cover it. "How did he fool us for 7 years?" Chairman Robert Walsh demanded. Security Chief Frank Morrison admitted Torres had built an unshakable cover and exploited a blind spot no system was designed to catch. Preventing another heist would cost $8 million in new tech. Worse, the press had the story, "Dealer vanishes with $22 million in perfect casino heist. The fallout threatened player confidence and profits." Looking over the casino floor, Walsh said grimly, "Torres changed the industry. The question is, how many more like him are out there?"